I think the answer is straightforward, and in fact most people will be aware of it because we've seen it in the news, we've seen it in the world we live in. We see it, for instance, with Uber drivers or Deliveroo riders. We see that there is a change in the way things and services are provided to us, to clients. And so we see already with digitalization, geolocalization, and internet in general, we see that new platforms are going to be able to provide services, thanks to providers of services, to all sorts of clients. And so this is already a big transformation. The world of work is transformed in the sense that new workers and all sorts of workers are going to change the way they work in order to adapt to these new possibilities. So we see that in these sectors, and this is quite well known, in the project that I lead, which is the CEPASOC project, which is a project financed by the Agence Nationale de la Recherche in France, which is lasting 3 years. I mean, we have 6 more months. In this project, we have decided to focus specifically on domestic platform workers. So we didn't want to focus so much on what had already been done. So we didn't focus on transport platforms, but we wanted to look at these domestic platforms. And so in this research, we've been studying the changes which were brought to the sector of domestic work. And so I'm talking about cleaning, I'm talking about babysitting, I'm talking about these services which are within the house. Domus is the house. So it can be also hairdressing, and trying to see how some platforms have managed to change the rules in these jobs as well. So this has been part of our research because indeed we had, in fact, we had 3 angles of analysis, and we've had a legal analysis, we've had a sociological analysis, and we've had a more historical/theoretical analysis. And so maybe there are 2 ways to answer this question. I'll start with the sociological approach by saying that indeed the conditions of work are changing. So here I'm focusing specifically on domestic platform workers in order to say that even though the essence of work hasn't changed, I mean, a cleaner is still going to clean, the conditions of work have changed because the cleaner, for instance, might not be able to access the work in the same way as he or she, but usually she, used to. So it's going to be very subtle changes because sometimes, I mean, you might say that the conditions of work are the same in the sense that there will be a relationship with the client, because in this case, domestic platform workers, they go to the houses of their clients. You might say that they have the same relationship with someone who gives orders. I'm not saying employer here, I'm thinking of the platform. But there will be changes in the sense that these workers are not employees. I mean, they weren't necessarily employees before, so this is not, I mean, this is to be taken into account. But there will be changes, for instance, with the fact that they'll have to use their phones, they'll have to use the platform, they'll have to access understand these technological changes in order to deal with the work and in order to access the work. There will be changes also in the fact that they might not be able to meet together. Because again, like with via the phone or the platform, there might not be as much exchanges there was before. So that's for the changes of the conditions of work. Then there is a more legal aspect of this question, which is the access to rights. Here again, when we're focusing on domestic platform workers, and I need to make this difference with Uber drivers or transport platform workers, there will be a difference because it will be more difficult to get a sense of the rights they might have. And here I'm talking about the now famous dichotomy between dependent work and independent work. Whereas dependent workers will have access to certain labor rights which are well established and normally well protected by collective bargaining and by laws, independent workers might not and often will not get access to these rights. The proposal of directive of 2021 on the conditions of work of platform workers is a great idea, and it's first to be noted and to be welcome as a change which takes into account the needs of these platform workers. And so there is really a realization from the Commission and from the European institutions that something had to be done, and that's great. Then when we specifically look at the text, there are some very good things and some which are, I think, a bit more difficult. Like first, what I really liked in this text is the fact that there is a set of digital labor rights which are rather new and which really tackle the new needs of these digital workers, and that's really to be welcome. The main change brought by the directive proposal is the presumption of employment. I think that on principle it is a great idea, and it takes into account the dichotomy which exists in most European countries between, again, dependent and independent workers. But it might be difficult, first difficult to apply, and we know that in the first version there were criteria which were very difficult and which have now disappeared in the Parliament version. But even without this criteria, the ETUI had proposed an analysis which showed that all workers would not be covered, and in fact this is the goal, and that's my difficulty with it. All workers will not be covered, which means that some independent workers will not get basic rights, which I think they should have access to. In fact, I'm tempted to say that there is not one right answer, and whatever we're looking at will need to take into account the different context, the different sector, the different country, the different regulations. And so once we have that, once we get a sense of these differences, which will have an impact on the best tools, we need to define these two concepts. So maybe I'll start with social citizenship. Social citizenship here, I understand it. I mean, there are several ways of understanding it, but I just want to focus on this idea of basic standards, or maybe net, which should protect the citizens. I want to focus on this idea of universalism. This idea that every single citizen would have access to rights because of the mere fact that he or she is a citizen. And in fact, I must lose time, but I think it's worth saying it. I must say that when we say social citizenship, we actually think some sort of social residence, because this social citizenship would not be limited to citizens. In fact, when Marshall created the concept in the 50s in the UK, he spoke about citizens because it wasn't really a question at the time that citizens were residents or not. Today we should definitely say residents. Anyway, when we're talking about social citizenship, we get this idea of a net for everybody. And initially when I started the project, I thought this might be a good idea in order to go beyond this dichotomy between dependent workers, employees, and independent workers. And this might be a way to go beyond the concept of worker in order to give rights to everybody. And this was interesting also for micro work, which is also within platforms, and which has this difficulty of maybe not using workers, but only people / citizens / residents. And so this could be a great idea as long as this standard is high enough. And I was just saying that we need to be very careful with this concept because it is useful as long as it is seen as a goal to improve the dignity of workers and people. If it's only used as a way to fight poverty and a way to maybe go to the bottom, then it will not be useful. And maybe I'll spend one more minute on it just to say that it's interesting, and we did that in this project, to focus on the situation in Sweden and compare it to the situation in the United Kingdom, where they both have this concept of social citizenship, but they use it in very different ways. And so it's very important not to believe that one single word or one single concept might be the solution. It will require analysis and implementation, as I said at the beginning, within a given context, country, and sector. And actually, the answer is going to be the same when it comes to social dialogue, because here again, you might say social dialogue is the answer. Workers just need to come together and protect their rights, end of the story. But then you need to see how it is done. And here I'll just take one example, the example of France. You might be aware of the fact that there were elections for transport platform workers in May 2022. And these elections were, let's say, difficult, meaning that, in fact, there was almost no participation of the workers. I won't get into details, but I just want to say that social dialogue is obviously a great idea, and the goal has to be the dignity of workers, but again, we have to be careful in the way it is implemented.